Welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartlidge, and I'm passionate about helping you master your animal training skills using the most positive and least intrusive approaches. Here at ATA, we understand that navigating the vast challenges you encounter in training requires a comprehensive base of knowledge and experience. It's common to face obstacles and rough patches on your journey that can leave you feeling overwhelmed and stressed. Therefore, since 2015, we've been on a mission to empower animal training geeks worldwide. We've aided thousands in developing their skills, expanding their knowledge, boosting their confidence, and maximizing their positive impact on all the animal and human learners they work with. We are excited to do the same for you. Simply visit www.atamember.com, join our vibrant community, and geek out with us. And of course, in the meantime, enjoy this free podcast episode as we explore new ways to help you supercharge your training skills, grow your knowledge, and build your confidence, so that you can craft a life that positively impacts every learner you encounter. Well, we will kick off today's episode, number 250 of the ATA podcast show, and I'm thrilled to continue our tradition of having the wonderful Dr. Susan Friedman, one of the most significant influences on my animal training and behavior journey, join us every 50th episode. Susan, it's fantastic, as always, to have you back with us, and I'm incredibly grateful for you always making time for us here at Animal Training Academy.
Yeah, you can see, and maybe the audience can hear, I've got this gigantic smile. I am so excited for your success to have this level of reach. 250 is an incredible number. Congratulations. And thanks for including me in that joy.
Yeah, it's 9 years, I think. ATA is celebrating its 10th birthday this year, a decade of improving the lives of learners all over the planet of all different species. We've been fortunate here at the Academy to have you and Rick Hester. Sorry, Rick. Yeah. Join us multiple times since episode 200. And episode 200 was released on May the 9th, 2023. So nearly 2 years has passed since then. And that was a very popular episode. Lots of people reached out to me and said how valuable and helpful it was for them with the things we talked about. We talked about functional assessments and intervention designs. We talked about negative reinforcement. We talked about non-linear contingency analysis. And then when discussing the topics that you'd most like to cover today, you mentioned some of the same subjects: negative reinforcement, non-linear contingency analysis. Thinking back to that episode, number 200, with negative reinforcement, we talked about how when an animal says no by avoiding or escaping something, that behavior itself is reinforced negatively. And we talked about how this highlighted the importance of teaching animals an appropriate way to communicate their discomfort rather than resorting to undesirable behaviors like ones, for example, we might label as aggressive. So some of the key takeaways I took from that recording a couple of years ago was that animals should have a clear and safe way to express discomfort. Trainers should recognize when behavior is motivated by the removal of an aversive stimulus, and considerations of the ethical use of negative reinforcement involves giving the learner control rather than coercion. And we then talked about the distinction between ethical applications of negative reinforcement versus coercive applications, such as forceful handling, ear pinches, or prong collars, were I think some of the examples we used, and how the goal should always be to reduce reliance on coercion and increase voluntary participation in training. So I'm super interested, and I know that the listeners will be as well, to hear how your thoughts have continued to evolve over the last few years on this topic.
Yeah, your list of the things that we talked about and that you got from it is really extraordinary. So I so appreciate that when we talk about something, you take it and streamline it and are able to describe it back in even more meaningful ways than I gave it to you the first time. So that description that you just did is really the full story. Really great. It's such a luxury to work with and talk with people who are so much on the same wavelength that when you say something, they can elaborate on it and make it even better. So thanks for that. Yeah, the discussion continues. It remains as a main, shiny thing for me to continue to figure out how are we going to use negative reinforcement well? Where does it come in? And so I keep refining my ideas and understanding. Um, when we agree that animals have a right to say no, we're saying that we will honor the no by backing away. And then we also need to have the skills to shape the yes, to be able to build, to teach new skills. So that's become kind of the saying that I am working with, that I'm trying to build towards is honor the no and shape the yes. So what does that look like? We can teach people to better observe the no when it occurs, that they reinforce by moving away, negatively reinforce no's that are milder, earlier forms of the no, the precursors. So what you've got is animals communicating no with just an ear twitch instead of a full-on growl. And we can think about different ways of using negative reinforcement to honor the no. For example, ready for some examples? Okay. For example, I've identified in my trying to analyze the possibilities that there are ways of negatively reinforcing a no, moving away to honor the no, or removing the tool, um, or lowering the criterion for what we're asking for. We can either do it with a sub-threshold approach, where we move away, and as we go forward towards the animal, we strive to never trigger the big no or any no. And those two sub-threshold ways, one way is what Joe Lang has been describing for us, which is a time-based procedure. We move forward, stay there for 3 seconds or some short number of seconds, and then we back away. And then we go a little more forward, wait for about 3 seconds, and back away, never triggering the no until we can get close enough that the animal is no longer saying no. That's one version of using negative reinforcement to honor the no. Another one is a contingency, not time based, where we move forward only sub threshold, never triggering the no. And we wait until the animal does a behavior that shows an increase in their calm affect, lower arousal, and then we step back. So now instead of waiting a few seconds, we're waiting for a calmer behavior, or another calm behavior. And I'll give examples with animals in a minute. And then we step back. And then, of course, there is the third procedure that is over threshold that we don't recommend, where you trigger the full-on no response. Imagine a dog just, out of its mind, growling and straining at the lead, and you wait for them to calm down, and then you move away. So those are when we say honor the no with negative reinforcement, don't just work through the no, or don't force the animal to give up the no. What does matching that function, negative reinforcement, look like? So let me quickly give you examples with animals, then I'll turn it back to you for more questions, Ryan. Um, for example, if we have a bird that, flies to the mesh when you approach to drive you away. So we see that there's high intensity. They bang the mesh, their feathers are up, their eyes are flashing. So those are all the emotional behaviors that are tracking your close proximity. Um, Rather than waiting for that animal to calm down, the sub-threshold approach would be to only go as close as that bird remains calm, wait for 3 seconds, back away, and then repeat as we move slightly forward. That would be the example of that over threshold behavior. You got too close. We would consider that an error in the procedure and you should move away. We could talk about it with dogs. So, for example, or anything really, we've used it with elephants, giraffe. If the animal shows you that they're calm while you're working on the hoof until you bring out the knife, then you would remove the knife. And then you would have to bring that knife back in with some procedure to get the yes. So would it be, some kind of time-based procedure, or would it be contingent on a calmer behavior? So those are some of the things we're talking about when we talk about matching the function of the problem behavior when it's negative reinforcement. How can we use negative reinforcement to teach the animal that saying no is not necessary, not in its favor, and that saying yes would be the more reinforcing alternative? Did that make sense? I feel myself kind of losing my own thread as I describe it this way. What do you make of that information?
I'm grateful for you being on our show and being willing to lose your thread as we talk about these things.
Absolutely.
I think having the three uses of negative reinforcement is helpful to think about time-based, contingency-based, or over threshold. And I'm curious as you're talking, like what are you seeing in your work? Because it's been 2 years since we did episode 200 where we touched on this topic as well. I mean, it still is front of mind for you, and I'm curious if the reason being is you're seeing stuff as you go out there and work with trainers and work in different communities that's keeping this really relevant for you and important to talk about. What is the biggest challenge you see with professional trainers? Is it a limit of application, a limit of knowledge? Is it because people are using the sub threshold more than other tools? People are not reasonably understanding negative reinforcement. What are you seeing that's keeping this so relevant for you?
Amazing question. I think what makes it so relevant to me, why I'm spending time in this area, is because people don't see the nose. They don't see the nose until they become really loud. So we have animals leaving the training session now that we've given them the freedom to just walk away and find their reinforcers elsewhere. We see animals escalating to the point of, a giraffe smacking a trainer with its head, or an eland kicking. So even now, when I look at some of the videos that I use in LLA as great examples, I'm starting to see, like within the first 2 seconds of the video, there was a no that we missed entirely because it was very, very small. So I think the biggest, maybe it's not a challenge, but um, the biggest contribution, change, helping people change what they do, is recalibrating their eyes to see these precursor behaviors of no, so that the animal never has to escalate to these obvious, intense, high response cost, or even dangerous versions of no. So it's catching that no early and then knowing what to do about it.
And so building our observation skills.
Mm-hmm.
And how so I don't know how to ask this correct in a way that's going to represent the muddled thoughts that I have, but how have we got to here? Is it because we've spent too much time focusing on teaching positive reinforcement and not enough time also talking about using negative reinforcement, which has limited our ability to do the observations?
Again, this is really an incredible question for me to ponder. How did we get here that we're spending so much time on thinking about how to use negative reinforcement? Not only how to use it well, but when to use it. When, for me, when is when the animal says no. That's when we pull it out of our pack and say, okay, I'm going to honor that no and move away. And then your question is, how did we get here that we're just now recognizing animals are saying no and that we can respond to those no's in order to get to the yes? I think is partly because we work with animals often that say yes a lot. We don't work with these really hard behaviors that require animals to stand for a really long time, relatively speaking, as with a blood draw. I mean, an animal might have to stand for 5, 6, 7 minutes for a blood draw. We weren't doing the behaviors that are requiring so much of animals that saying no now becomes part of the dialogue, part of the conversation that we're having with animals. So we're asking for things like blood draws. We're asking for things like radiographs, for sonograms. We're asking animals to stay still with painful procedures, potentially painful, like knifing an abscess out of a giraffe's hoof voluntarily. So you see that question. This is why I really adore working with you as we do every 50 podcasts, is because that is a really important question to have an answer to. Why now are we talking about R minus? Are we saying, here's the scenario where we would move it out from the top of the hierarchy? We would pull it down from the speed bump and the caution sign, and we would say, use it under this particular situation. Why are we finding ourselves in situations where animals are saying no to us? And I think the main answer is that our positive reinforcement training has been so successful that we are now asking animals to be partners in more intense medical procedures rather than putting them into squeeze chutes or netting them, toweling them, or anesthetizing them. That's huge. When you start to ask, when positive reinforcement training has become so effective that you're now asking for these, you're asking for more than just shifting from A to B or, to move out to an area, interact with a new enrichment item. As we've asked for more and more, because positive reinforcement has shown us we can have these dialogues instead of these command-based monologues. Now we're saying, hang on, because I'm seeing that what we're asking is big enough that the animals are saying no. And we have to say, you can say no. And when you say no, instead of ignoring it or saying, oh, gee, we're going to have to anesthetize the giraffe because we can't get past the no, we're saying, wait a minute, here are strategies to get past the no, honoring the no, and strategies to get past it. So we can do these more, they're not so more complicated as they ask more of the animal to give more voluntary behavior under increased duress to avoid doing things that ultimately take away their power to be partners, squeeze chutes, and anesthesia.
So I want to be able to better articulate this for myself because I am guided by and lean on the hierarchy and teach that to others. And negative reinforcement being above positive reinforcement. And it's not, you can see that I'm struggling to articulate this. Is it not that we're choosing negative reinforcement as a strategy, but we we need to know how to use it because the animal's going to say no. And then we need to, in real time, select that procedure.
Yeah. So to add to what you're saying, and I appreciate you, having to walk lightly to figure out where you can plant your feet. We're now doing procedures with animals, asking for volunteer, cooperative responses from them that are harder than we have asked for in the past. In the past, when we've asked for things like hoof care and blood draws, we've done it with more restraint. We didn't ask for it to be voluntary or for them to be partners in our care. Positive reinforcement training has been so successful that we keep pushing that boundary of where we can apply it. And now we are actually doing voluntary blood draws. I mean, just stop and think about it for a minute. It's incredible. And part of doing these more difficult behaviors where we're asking for more, but still maintain our goal of having a dialogue with the animal, a partnership through these procedures, then we have to realize they may say no more. And what are we going to do when they do? So we say, okay, we're going to respect the no, which means going up there and grabbing negative reinforcement. That becomes respecting the no because that's what the animal is telling us in the dialogue. When their ears pin back and their tail starts to swish and their shoulders twitch or they move their head away, they lean back, all of those are saying you've now gotten into a territory of partnership where you're leaning on me more and it's getting uncomfortable. So we can just ignore that and say, well, we cannot train this behavior with this individual with positive reinforcement. So we're going to need to anesthetize them or put them in a squeeze chute. Or we can say, hang on, if we honor the no, so we teach them there's always an escape route. We will hear the no and we will respond to it. And then we need to develop our skills at competing with the no to get the yes. That's how we get animals that stand for 7 minutes for a jugular blood draw or keep their head still on a target while we give an injection or while we work on their hoofs in ways that are not so comfortable, that are not just brushing the bottom of the hoof, but are knifing and rasping. So if we're going to do that as partners in these procedures, that breaks through to kind of the next level of training. Who would have thought 20 years ago that you could get a voluntary blood draw from a hyena, excited to see you, responding to the head back cue and holding that for 7 minutes. It is incredible, But if what you're asking is to just move A to B in the morning and then back to A in the afternoon, that's a very different level of shaping behavior. Or you're going to shape a show behavior. That's a very different level of training than asking an animal to stand still while I knife an abscess. Can it be done with positive reinforcement? Who knew? Part of the answer is yes, if first you honor the no. Does that clarify?
Yes, it does. I think so it's because we're been so successful with positive reinforcement that we're starting to ask what else is possible, and we're starting to ask for behaviors that might be labeled as harder, more uncomfortable. And so as you just finished up there with, part of the answer is yes, we can do this with positive reinforcement as long as we honor the no. And so then we need those different parts of the hierarchy to strengthen our likelihood of success.
That's right. And it should really be no surprise that we can go up and down because in all three articles and all of my presentations and podcasts, I've always described the hierarchy not as a recipe, but as a guideline, and that you can move up as needed. You just need to make sure that moving up is necessary. And how do we make sure? Well, I mean, one guideline is to ask other experts what their opinion is and to not work alone making these decisions in a vacuum. So I think that is very much part of how we got to say, here's an example of where you would go up, fetch out negative reinforcement, and then I think everybody agrees who's talking about this, you get to positive reinforcement as quickly as possible. I've not met anybody suggesting that it escalate to punishment, positive punishment, or negative punishment. That's where we're at. And really, Ryan, I just want to say again that this question you've asked me is so important for me to have thought through. Is how did we get here? We haven't used negative reinforcement in our work for years. How did we get here? And I think at least part of the answer is we're training more harder behaviors. From the animal's point of view, we're asking for more.
Yo, you, the listener, I'm no doubt this is going to be helpful for you. I know that it's helpful for me. And also, I love that I did LLA for the first time in 2010. So 15 years now since I was first lucky enough to do that with you. And even now, just to hear you talk about moving up and down, these are, every time I talk to you about the hierarchy or about functional assessments, there's some other bit that with my learning history and my genetics and who I am as a learner, up until that point has always been in front of me, but hasn't been as clear. So just giving little bits there that have always been included in the things that I've read multiple times over the last 15 years.
Yeah.
I just get clarity right now in this conversation. So I'm glad I asked that question. And I'm sure
Me
it's
too.
definitely going to be helpful for our
Yeah.
listeners as well. We talked about 3 ways that we can work with negative reinforcement, which were time-based, contingency-based, over threshold.
Where the over threshold would not be recommended.
No. And then some might also give food, for example, if they get a no. So does that fit in your thinking with
It
what you're
really
seeing, what
does.
you're teaching? Yeah.
That's one of the challenges is I don't know that challenges is a big word. I would say this is one of the interesting bumps in the road that people have shown us they're experiencing, and that gives us an opportunity to think it through. One of them is just observing these subtle no's. People just don't see them. The best way to see them is to look at video. It is not real time. So I want to give that tip. A video and then we stop, start, and continue with that video. We look and then we play it again. Oh, stop there. Did you see that change in weight? That's where you should have put down the target stick or whatever. So we're actually going over video. It's a very important strategy. And then this other kind of in my opinion, it's an obstacle to using these techniques well in this circumstance is that people will, let the animal, give that animal the space and the autonomy to step back. And then they'll also give a positive reinforcer. They'll also give a piece of food. So right now I'm envisioning a giraffe who I have a lot of opportunities to learn from in my zoo consulting and working with the great Amy Shells, great innovator. So let's say the giraffe has its foot on the block and we see a little tell, a little no, like an ear flick. So we might encourage that animal to step back. We'll remove our hands right away and step back. And then people will also not only remove hands, but they'll offer a cracker. And we've realized that if you do both, it's hard to compete with teaching the new skill because the net gain for saying no, if you'll allow us to talk in this kind of metaphorical way, the net gain for saying no is not only you get to have the hands removed and step away, but you also get the cracker. That's sort of the bundle. Then the bundle for coming forward and keeping your foot on the block for hoof care is just the cracker. So we see that there is kind of a differential gain and loss equation here that we have to account for. So our recommendation is to let negative reinforcement reinforce the no and save those positive reinforcers for the yeses. So that now the bundle of reinforcers for yes is the food, hopefully working with a love trainer, solving problems, all the things that we can put into that bundle of reinforcers for the yes. Praise, like if you're working with a dog, it might be the food treat, praise, petting, all of that for the yes, and for the no, hands off, the negative reinforcer. And you can see that this is related to all of the seeds that grew from Emily and Ava and Peggy is those start behaviors. That's what we want to teach is the start behaviors, the stop behaviors, and the continue behaviors. We want all three of those in the repertoire of the animal now that we're asking for hard things like blood draws. And so that means we need to teach them. We teach start behaviors when the animal leans forward and invites us in, and we reinforce that. We teach stop behaviors when an ear twitches rather than kicking us by removing our hands or stepping away. And we teach continue behaviors by only continuing to reinforce while the animal is showing us, I'm going to throw in another term, assent behaviors related to consent behaviors, but consent, at least in this country, is a legal term. So there's another term for working with learners that can't sign a contract, and that's assent. So we're looking for all three stop behaviors: start, stop, and continue. And continue is described so beautifully by Anna Linehan, who works with Joe Lang, whose nonlinear analysis course I took. So this is like the third course I've taken, and second course and many, many seminars online, where she says to reach really the highest standard, we need those no behaviors. Those are the stops. We need the start behaviors, which is an animal, enthusiastically showing with their behavior they want to proceed working with us. We've got to see those and continue behaviors. And then those are assent. The start and continue are assent behaviors. And when the animal says no, stop, then assent has been withdrawn and we need to stop what we're doing. So I'm thinking of it, in human feedback, for team feedback, we've talked about this. I think it started with a man named Philip Daniels. I can't find original writing of his, but everybody attributes this to him. What do I want you to start when we work together? What do I want you to stop doing? What do I want you to continue doing? That stop, start, and continue scheme has been in the human resources world for a very long time. And it's well used across all the different people who are consulting and coaching and so forth. And I realized the dot to connect, whatever you want to call it, saying yes, saying no, saying start buttons, it's back to that framework. We want animals to have a history of reinforcement for saying no. That's where negative reinforcement comes in. We stop what we're doing, to say stop, and to say continue. And when an animal can communicate all of those to us, then we can ask them to do really hard things. Hard because they're either long duration stationing, like a blood draw or hoof care, or like painful, uncomfortable in some way, like dealing with a hoof abscess or a wound.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad I asked that question, and I find myself really curious about you, the listener, and what you've been implementing, and how what we're sharing in this episode shares similarities with your application or differs please feel free to reach out and share. I'm super curious to know what everyone's up to and how this information is landing with everyone. Let's move on, Susan. Unless you have something else you'd like to add about negative reinforcement before we do, because I did want to talk about non-linear contingency analysis as well. If I remember correctly, back to episode 200, we discussed how behavior is not solely determined by a simple, immediate ABC chain, but rather by a network of interconnected contingencies.
The only change I would make in that description is I would say may not, because most often in my experience, that one linear ABC is very informative.
And then we talked about, and I do remember as I was writing this morning, to keep it fresh in my brain, not because I'm completely unorganized, I was thinking about that. How do I word that? Is it accurate to say that apply it to all behaviors or some behaviors? So thank you for that. I appreciate that. And then when we talked about nonlinear contingency analysis, acknowledges that multiple antecedents and contingencies can interact in complex ways to influence a behavior. We talked about multiple examples in that episode, including an employee that you worked with arriving late to work. And we talked about penguins in a zoo context. So just for everyone listening, if you want to hear this stuff, I encourage you to listen to episode 200. You can do so after this episode, and that will tie in nicely. I'll link to it in the show notes. And also, just while I'm talking about that, I'll also link to episodes we did with Amy Shields, who Susan was just talking about with her work with Giraffe, to hear about, hear in her words as well, describe some of the things that we've been talking about today. Maybe for now, though, can we just refresh everyone listening what we mean when we talk about nonlinear contingency analysis, and then how your thoughts have evolved on this topic over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard of Gold Diamond on a CD that I have from 1977 or something, I couldn't make sense of it. I have to say, I just did not understand what we were talking about. And it's funny because my mentor, Carl Cheney, was Gold Diamond's TA. I think I might have mentioned to you, which I get a big kick out of. And when I said that to him, he said, yeah, it was always hard to understand what he was saying, not only because he was saying things that were very brilliant and very complex, but he always had a cigar in his mouth. And so he was talking around the cigar. So that made me feel a little bit better that when I listened to or started to listen to these CDs I had of his contributions to behavior analysis, I couldn't pick it up at that time. But when Joe Lang started to introduce it, it started to not only make sense, but become more important to my work, and allow me to connect the dots to the model that I use that didn't use the words non-contingency, non-linear contingency analysis, but it was there in the bucket that I called, I and others called distant antecedents. That's what we mean there. So if you think of the linear ABC, the more immediately influential antecedents of the cue and the context in which the behavior occurs, and you think of the behavior in observable terms, and you think of the influential consequences that maintain the behavior, that is, reinforcers. Then we go back to the distant antecedent bucket and we say, I think of us like being mini me's and rummaging around in this bucket for additional contingencies that are influencing that linear ABC, then sort of the nucleus of that complex, of that cell or that atom. So what else might influence that so-called problem behavior, or Joe calls it the disturbing behavior? Give it a name. Like I always say, we can call it Dumbledore, but we need a name to communicate it. What else influences that? That, if we knew and addressed, we may solve the problem behavior without even directly dealing with that original linear contingency, or would just help us work with that linear contingency. Okay, now this makes sense to me. And so I started looking for examples of this, looking for examples of where just working to replace the problem behavior or teach an alternative was very hard because there were other things going on that I needed to deal with to get smooth sailing in that linear ABC. And that's where that example of an employee who always came late, reinforcing coming on time is not enough. I had to discover this other influential contingency influencing her tardiness, which was that she needed to get her kid on the bus at the same time she needed to leave for work if she was going to be on time. Solve the kid on the bus problem by asking her to come in a half hour later so she could be both on time and parent her child, and the problem of tardiness was solved. Not by directly reinforcing tardy behavior, but by solving a nonlinear contingency floating in our orbit that was an obstacle. Okay, now I have an example. I've got it, where it's going to be useful to us. And then Rick and I and the whole Penguin team and Jason Breedle, names worth mentioning because we're working constantly in teams. So the I word becomes irrelevant and the we word becomes relevant. But I want you to know who we is, who we is. I don't know how to conjugate that right. We'll deal with that after the podcast. Realize that the problem of the penguins not swimming, if we only thought about that in a linear way, it would lead us to do what many penguin trainers were doing, which was add reinforcers to being in the water. So we compete with staying out by making going in even more reinforcing, and that can work. So we have to get away from this dichotomous something's right, wrong, you versus me, this confrontational thinking. Some people do use supersized positive reinforcers to get those penguins in the water, and it works beautifully. So let's not forget that, because it does work. It can work, I should say. But in this case, adding fish, we just were not seeing immediate effects. Something produced the exploration of a nonlinear approach. We said, what is reinforcing them staying out of the water? Which I don't think is the obvious question to ask without having this nonlinear gold diamond headset available to you. We ask, what do the penguins lose if they go in the water? These are really great questions. It's like your question that opened the podcast. How did we get here? Why are we talking about negative reinforcement? We haven't needed to talk about it for 10 years. So we asked that question, what do they lose? And we realized they lose the nest. Okay, you've heard the story, just to refresh. So a nonlinear contingency, that is another contingency beside our basic run of the animals in some way are avoiding something by getting in the water. So we ask what? Not enough nest caves, add nest caves more than there are pairs of penguins. And like a light switch, those penguins are in the water without having to increase the reinforcers, although a big increase did occur when we started offering live trout. But that was sort of another chapter in this book. It wasn't really part of the chapter whose title is Penguins Not Swimming in the Multi-Million-Dollar New Habitat. So that's how nonlinear analysis for me became important to learn. And so I started studying it. I didn't just listen to a podcast here or there. No shade on a podcast. It's a great place to get information, but it's often just not enough. You've got to dig in much deeper, spend more time, even spend more money, taking courses, reading books, until you get to a place where you feel like you can authentically represent the information well. Or if you're going to discount it and say, no, I don't advocate going down that path, you've got to be an expert in that material to defend why you think it shouldn't be used.
So where were you, in your personal opinion, 2 years ago in terms of your authenticity to teach this and describe this and to teach its application? Are you there now? Were you not there then? Are you still on that? Do you still feel like you're?
I was there now. And now what I'm working on is not speaking in such absolutes and then showing why not. Not just saying it, but showing what the alternatives are. There are alternatives to negative reinforcement for the stop communication that are positive reinforcement, better antecedent arrangement, lower criterion for the behavior, stimulus pairing done in a modern way, which means that it's a short burst of stimulus pairing to get an operant behavior to emerge. I can talk more about that. The person, have you had Kiki Yablon on to talk about that?
We've just been on one of our shows.
Yeah. She's really worked hard to develop what that looks like, stimulus pairing, to get to operant behavior, to get to the yes. You can, you can use differential reinforcement, which would have been a standard move. Differential reinforcement of an alternative or incompatible behavior. I think I've listed the main ones. So where I am today is to say, here's the tools. Here are the tools in the toolbox. We don't want to deal with absolutes. You must never use negative reinforcement. You must always use positive reinforcement. Nor do we want to say, so I'm also rejecting these absolutes that say you must use negative reinforcement to honor the no, and never use positive reinforcement when an animal says no. Yeah, these absolutes are holding us back, and I find them ridiculous and exhausting. But I will say it's also exhausting to figure out what the heck what's going on, So I spend a lot of time, my team and I spend a lot of time reading articles, taking courses, listening to podcasts, and then finding what sticks and what doesn't, and demonstrating why the absolutes are the next new obstacle to remove.
As you're talking, I'm reminded of a comment on a Facebook post we had, and the comment was from somebody, and I don't know them. And if you're this person and you're listening to this podcast, shout out to you and gratitude for providing an opportunity for us all to learn. But the Facebook post was about something to do with how to get unstuck if you're hitting rough patches in your training. It's a little PDF we've put together. And then the question pops up, says, what do you think about crate training? So unrelated. Or this person might have been stuck in that space. And I said something along the lines of, we lean on Susan Friedman's hierarchy of behavior change interventions. We treat each animal as an individual, and we'll go from there based on the learner in front of us. But I get the sense, that might just be my sense and might not exist in reality, that wasn't quite adequate in what the person was looking for. So I'm acknowledging my own potential for growth here and learning how to articulate what you're talking about, how to articulate that there's not to talk in absolutes and to help. That's not what I'm saying. To help others see that in the answers that I provide to them. What I'm curious if you're seeing that as something that's holding us back. What might you have to share with our listeners in terms of how we can be the most effective teachers when teaching those, like clients in their house with their animals, who might be quite at a level of understanding that makes it really challenging for them to take in that information?
Yeah, I think it does require expertise to remove the absolutes and to explain why. So we just removed an absolute when you, fed back what we had talked about last time, and you had something that intimated always, and I said may, about whether or not there will be nonlinear. There won't always be. Most of the time, there are not in our animal training, in my experience. But I think that using examples really helps. So I think it is also important to give them the big framework, the meta framework. We use the hierarchy to be thoughtful about what procedure we use. We're not just going to grab a procedure solely because it's effective. That's what the hierarchy does for us. It encourages us to think first, to stay with positive reinforcement or differential reinforcement as much as possible. And if we're going to go up, we're going to think very carefully about it. So that's what I want them to know about why we keep saying the hierarchy is useful. What's it useful for? It's useful for slowing us down and maintaining the value that effectiveness is not enough. It should also be the least intrusive approach to training the crate. And then I think giving examples is the best we can do. So we can say, for example, I have a video of Cesar Millan teaching Marlo Thomas, an actress from old time, to crate train her dog. And he says, okay, get it in the crate, close the door. Good. Door's closed. Is it locked? Yeah, good. Okay, come on. We're going to go have a cup of coffee for 15 minutes and then we'll come back. So there's that level of crate training that is highly intrusive. And I think explaining what we mean by intrusive is important too. That means the animal has no control over its own outcomes. It can't get out of the crate. And then on the other side of the continuum, we have someone who says, I'm not going to even ask my animal to be in a crate. I'm just never going to go away. I'm never going to have a situation in my home where the animal needs to be crated. I'm going to tell the Amazon guy to leave the boxes at the end of the driveway or whatever. I'm just never going to open my door. In the middle, then, are all of our positive reinforcement solutions. And we're going to learn to use those first. So that would be in the crate example, shaping by approximation, selecting for behaviors that are close. We're going to have that conversation, which is a big conversation. Shaping is incredible. And it does require very nuanced observation so that you can catch the animal when it naturally offers something closer to the end goal, rather than having to produce the variability by withholding. So there's a lot in that. And then we go from there. So I think that having an example, describing the funny extremes, and then explaining what we do when we do it with positive reinforcement. And then if, for example, I'm thinking of, let me think of her name. It'll come to me. She has a beautiful video on when negative reinforcement makes sense. So I'm thinking of, Caroline, it's coming
Caroline
back to me.
Chevalier.
It's 2 words. Chevalier Cabot.
That's who I was thinking about.
Yeah. So can we find her and honor her by getting the name right?
Caroline Crivier Chabot.
Crivier Chabot. And I've worked at it. Another thing to learn. She has a beautiful video on YouTube where she says, she explains that she works with shelter cats. So, how would you teach a shelter cat to get into a crate or to get out of a crate? It does involve allowing the animal to say no, meaning stepping away. That's negative reinforcement. So I think the way that we talk to people is, first of all, we have to tell them it's not easy. So if you came for just a simple 5-cent answer, you came to the wrong person. And I would caution you, if you find the person who does that, to come back to us. Number one, it takes effort and time to build that expertise. But this is, I think of that quote from Saint Exupery, whose name is French, and I've also said poorly, that we want to teach people not how to build the ship first. We don't want to give them hammers and nails. We want to show them and build a love of the vast and endless sea. So that's what we want to do first, is teach people to give them the experience that leads to them loving the vast and endless panorama of behavior change science with the least intrusive methods. So when we talk about negative reinforcement, we're not talking about using it because we love negative reinforcement. If we could keep aversive stimuli out of the antecedents so animals don't have to say no, that would always be our first best choice is, can you train this in a way that the animal doesn't have to say no? That's number one. Absolutely. That's the least intrusive. But if we do need to work with an animal that's experiencing what we're doing with intrusively, then negative reinforcement has a place because it's a way that we honor their saying no. We don't just push them around. Yeah. So I think when you're talking to people and you say, well, how do you train a crate? To say, well, we adhere to the intervention, to the hierarchy of least intrusive and positive reinforcement, doesn't give them enough information. But it is the beginning. It's the first 5 steps of the path. And then you have to tell the rest of the story.
No, well, I like the that you added in there. If you want a quick fire answer, then you've come to the wrong person. Mm-hmm. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's a very big truth.
Well, looking at the time, I wrote down loads of notes from Susan and I talking before we pushed record, talking to you, the listener of this show. So I could keep going and going and going. And I really want to, but we've been going for about an hour. So let's head towards wrapping it up there, Susan. Before we do, though, unless you have anything else you'd like to add and you feel you haven't had the opportunity to share based on what we've talked about?
Oh, thanks for that. Last licks. I don't really think so. It's just a very, very exciting world that we're living in. And the science that helps us explain learning and behavior is itself so thrilling and so exciting. So I just hope that if nothing else, we excite people to look more, talk more, try other things, and enjoy.
Well, additionally, luckily for you, the listener of the show, if you do want to learn more from Susan, from Behavior Works, it does not have to stop at this podcast episode. There are multiple other learning opportunities that you can get yourself involved in. Susan, could you share with everyone what learning opportunities Behavior Works has coming up?
Okay, places people can go to learn more about our work and what we can help you with, www.behaviorworks.org. And then there, not only are there probably 35, 38 articles that might be of interest to you, written for lay people, there's also some veterinary book chapters that I've written available to you there. And then take a look at the courses that we offer, because we offer many more courses now. Of course, there's LLA, which is our flagship Living and Learning with Animals, 8-week course that we adore and love our students. And then there's How Research Works. Christy Alligood is teaching. How Movement Works. Lori Stevens is teaching. We've got Nicole Thaler-Sadowski teaching how retrieving works without really killing anything, but all the great behaviors of a retriever. We've got Kiki Yaplan doing an exciting book club, reading Skinner books about behavior, I think was the last one. And we have a journal reading group Christy Alligood runs to be able to learn how to read those journal articles. I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but it's all listed on the website under courses. And the other thing we have is career connections, where people who are interested in becoming trainers who are behavior analysts, or behavior analysts who are interested in becoming trainers, can talk with Christy and I about how to build that bridge the way that we have. So I think that's the story. And then just all my podcasts, and hope to see some of you on the road. Clicker Expo's coming up in March in Chicago. And yeah, busy, exciting, happy life, disseminating science. What could be better?
Pretty reinforcing.
Yeah,
The 250 episodes keeps bringing me back.
me too. It's bringing both of us back, and a lot of other people who are so grateful that you've built this reach for people to get information that they need and to become more empowered, and then to pay it forward to empower others. It's wonderful, Ryan.
We're loving those ripples. Thank you to you, the listener, for spreading them. We will link to everything Susan's mentioned in the show notes. So one last time, from myself and on behalf of all who have been listening, we really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us at ATA, Susan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hope to see you at 300.
And thank you so much for listening as well. This is your host, Ryan Cartlidge, signing off from this episode of the Animal Training Academy podcast show. We hope today's conversation inspired you and equipped you with new tools for your trainer's toolbox. Remember, every challenge in training is an opportunity to learn and sharpen your animal training geekery. Embrace the rough patches, learn from them, and keep improving. And don't forget, the path to growing your skills and expanding your knowledge continues beyond this episode. Visit www.atamember.com to join our supportive membership, where you will find a community of trainers just like you. Together, we're making a huge positive difference in the lives of animal and human learners worldwide. Until next time, keep honing your skills, stay awesome, and remember, every interaction with an animal or human learner is your opportunity to create ripples. We're here cheering you on every step of the way. See you at the next episode.